Okay, it's a little bit after 8:30, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is week 2 of Introduction to Corrections, and I am going to cover some information. Uh, I have had a number of students reach out to me with questions about the project, and I constantly remind students that I purposely spent a lot of time going over the project from A to Z. A common question that's asked is, can you do phone interviews? Early on in the discussion for the project, I gave approval for phone interviews because if you read the module and don't listen to the lecture, you read it says that you have to get approval from your instructor. But I specifically stated in the recording that I'm giving the approval now, so you don't have to ask me about that. And then the other issue one student or a couple students asked is they couldn't get their interview done by week 2. Week 2 doesn't require the interview. You follow the requirements of the rubric. And I always encourage students that the rubric is more important than anything else in the big portion of the grading. APA citations and references is required. You also want to make sure that you have a cover sheet and things of that nature. But you want to make sure that you keep referring back to that open house. I have said that I have a lot of students. In this class, I have 3 sections of 120 students. 75 of you guys pretty much are introduction to corrections. So what I do is I maximize my time so that I can concentrate on other things concerning this course and the other courses by making sure that I provide you with information in advance to help you. So the archive of the open house, I did email it to you, and then it is also on the home page as well. So keep that in mind, okay? So let's take a look at the module again, starting out with the course. Again, my instructor information, and then also some valuable information in here concerning tutoring, and then some great articles that can help you as well, and then your rubrics. Now, as I was talking about earlier, I sent you the rubrics, so each week you'll have a rubric. So for this week, determinate or indeterminate sentencing. And students have to identify in his or her state. You get 5 points for that. Discuss the background for the state's decision, whether they are determinate or indeterminate and why, and explain and support the belief as to which you believe is more effective, expressing your own position. Doesn't matter whether it's determinate. You can argue that you disagree and explain your reasons why and support them. APA grammar, citations and references, you could lose 5 points for that. So you want to make sure that you have that information there as well. So that's the written assignment for this one. Now, also make sure you look in the module, which I will look in a minute, and it will tell you how many pages. It'll generally say 1 to 2 pages, and it will give you the point that if you can turn off your video. There's a button that you click to shut off your video. you'll see a video camera. There we go. All right. The reason why I say that is because it takes up a lot of bandwidth, and if for some miracle, which could happen, we have a number of students come on, it's going to load up the bandwidth real fast. So I'm the only one who usually keeps their video on. So I'd like to see you guys, but so that's okay. I hear you. I hear you, Samantha. So no big deal. Anyway, so that's module 2. So then you come down each week. You have that. That's for your written assignments all the way through. Again, very easy to follow. And then this week, your course project. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes, what you're supposed to do. Some students ask, what was the written assignment for week 1? Week 1 did not have a written assignment. It was introduction. And I do probably the most detailed introduction to the project of any professor, because I want to make sure that you guys learn from many of the things that students in previous quarters have asked. So I make notes of it, and every quarter I add more information. So you guys are getting a pretty good piece of information from the start about the project itself. So your course project is going to be an assignment that's due. Now, remember that both of these are due, your written assignment and your course project, this Sunday, by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, okay? And then you don't have one for week 3, but remember, you still want to get ready, because week 4, I believe, is when you do the interview, but you'd have to click on and look at it. And then, of course, the rubric for your discussion post, you guys are doing excellent work with that. And then your lectures, which take place at 8:30, and we roughly go to 9:30, or sometimes less than that, but at least no later than 9:30 for an hour. And that says beginning October the 10th, which obviously is not correct. So that actually should say, let's correct that right now. It should say January. Yeah, let's do that. Let's fix that. Student sent me a message. I thought I had fixed it. Maybe I fixed it in one section, but I didn't fix it in the other. Okay, January 10th, which is today. Okay, so now let's go back there, and it should say, yeah, beginning January 10th, 2018. So anyway, your next lecture will be week 4. There will not be one next week. And then, of course, the open house, if you want to, and you can't find yours, just copy your paste it and put it in your browser, and it'll lead you to the open house as well if you can't find it. So I try to make it easy as possible for you guys. Now I want to bring to your attention this announcement. It's called the new box grading system, which won't affect too much what I do with you guys. It's when I make comments pretty much on your papers. Most of the time, my comments will be attached over here in this section. Some professors use this a lot. I use it sometimes when I see a pattern happening, but I generally, and I respond pretty close to the rubric. So the line that you'll get to know is, I appreciate the time and effort that you put into completing this assignment. Why do I do that? Because I do. And I explained once before to leadership that I have to be who I am, and I like to encourage students. And so they say, well, after a while, the student won't read it. Well, that's all right. They'll know where I'm coming from already, and that's the point. So anyway, this new box grading system, if you want to take time to click on this, which I won't now, you can look at that, and it explains how it works. And so you'll be able to see your grades in the same place. If you don't see comments from where I'm putting them, let me know, because my understanding is that you still will see them. So that's all I'm going to say about that. That's a new, basically they replaced the Crocodoc that we used to have. It's just another system. And then these resources. So I'm going to go right into our week 2 announcement for this week, sentencing and correctional processes. Section 4 of the text. And then there's a section on, in the module, sentencing issues and sentencing definitions. And then remind you of the lecture. The initial post that was due yesterday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, goes in philosophy of sentencing. You guys have done pretty good with that. You guys are doing a really good job with the discussion methods. I will be submitting grades by the end of the week for your week 2 assignments, week 1 assignments rather. Be aware, someone's asked me already, that when you complete your assignments, which were due last Sunday for week 1, I am supposed to get your all grades back to you by by Saturday. So sometimes I do it until Sunday, but anyway, I try to get them done that weekend at any rate to make sure that you have them. So I only got one email in this class from a student that asked about that, but I wanted to let you know that information. So anyway, your reply post is, of course, through Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time as well. Your written assignment, well, I already mentioned that. And then your course project, selection of course agency contact person, and tells you when it's due already. And then we already been over this. Start strong, let's finish strong. Let's get into the habit. You know, let's not fall behind. Let's keep moving forward, and you'll do fine in this class. This is really not a lot of work in this class. It's just you have to consistently, and you got to make sure you do a good job with the project, because the essence of the project is to have you apply your transferable skills that I talked about in the open house throughout the course. And you'll see where they apply as you proceed to do the assignment for the project each of the weeks that you have it. Quickly, let's glance at the calendar. Of course, that October date I fixed. If you went to the course calendar and it opens up here, you will see that very quickly it actually tells you your live lectures take place on the 10th of January and not October. So I always tell students the course calendar is a good tool for telling you for the whole quarter what's coming up, when it's coming up, so you already know. And if there's a change, I will generally let you know about that. So, and you'll notice that from last week, the initial posts were Wednesday because we started on Tuesday the 2nd, but from every week on, and I put that note in last week's announcement, that the initial posts are due on Tuesday by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then your reply posts Saturday, and then your written assignment, which it actually tells you in here, if you click on it, how many pages, and it tells you 2 pages. So you'll lose points if you haven't done 2 pages. And repeating the facts, I'm more interested in critical thinking in your paper, and we've discussed that in detail. So in addition to what's in the rubric, you also want to make sure you have the right amount of pages as well. Why are we harping on the number of pages? Just so you understand it. Not to try to get you to do busy work, but because we believe that based on the information that's necessary to adequately address all of the issues of that assignment, that there should be a minimum of 2 pages, which means you can go over 2 pages. But the point of the matter is you need at least 2 pages in order to properly address each of the issues so that you will maximize your points in your grade. So there's that. And then with the course project, the requirements under Module 2 and the rubric. So we're going to go over that in a minute, okay? So that's that. Be aware that next week there is no lecture. So starting on Monday, the 15th, you'll have your reading assignments, your initial post, your reply post, your written assignment based on what's in the rubric and the module, and then your quiz, okay? So you want to make sure that you do that. So now let's get into our module where we'll spend the rest of our time here. Again, like a broken record, but that's okay. I still do it. Go over the assignments again. It says at the top, a 2-page paper. Do the following 2 things, and it tells you what to do. It tells you APA is required. Again, supporting what's in the rubric as well. Okay? Then your discussion posts. You know when they're due, and so forth. All right? And then the first part of your course project. For this section, it's very easy. In a paragraph or 2, notice this. It's just a paragraph or 2. You don't have to have 2 pages. Describe the agency that you selected for the project. Include a sentence or 2 as to why you selected that agency. Then in another paragraph, identify the person you'll interview and show their contact information. I've had students who don't provide the contact information. They'll mention the name of the person. We want the contact information. And the reason why is because sometimes we check to see if that person is given information that is not accurate, or either we want to make sure that we know later on down the road if there's an issue. Because remember, when you're starting this project out, you want to try to not have to switch. And then when making the initial contact, you'll have the opportunity to demonstrate communication. See, it's telling you right here. Remember, I told you along the way you'll be dealing with a transferable skill, and one is communication and so forth. Now, identifying this person, you can do that by the phone, or you could meet with them personally, or you have somebody you work with. Submit your completed assignment below. Now, you should have some information about citations in the body somewhere and references, because you're going to have a specific agency. And then they'll have a website, which you're going to need to access later anyway, so you might as well start out by learning a little bit about them as well. Me, I'm always one of these people who I overdo what I'm supposed to do, but it's good for you. It makes your road easier. And so this is a step-by-step project. So week 2 is very, very simple, okay, in terms of it. Now, as far as selection of agency, remember what I said in the recording. This is a corrections course, and I'm not going to say it much more after this week. And that your selections should be based upon one of 4, and only one of 4. Probation or parole. Probation or parole. Don't try to do both of them. Jail or prison. Don't try to do both of them. And elaborate on that in terms of your assignment that you're doing. And just remember what you had to do in week 1. Again, just a quick little thing I want to show you. I want to remind you that your assignment for week 1, and you'll see why, written assignment. The elements of the correction system is one of 4. You heard me mention them. There they are. and so forth and so on, and they're included in your textbook. But the point of the matter is that these are, and this is what you did that I haven't graded yet, a two-page paper, and I will be grading that as I already talked about. But the point of the matter is that, again, we started you off. Do not use law enforcement. This is corrections. And so it's one of four. Jail. I had a student that said they want to do probation and parole, and I told them no, narrow it down, because actually they kind of parallel, but they come at two different points, and the goal in one is to, well, pretty much the goal in one is to help, but the point of the matter is that probation is at one juncture and parole is at another, and I'm not going to elaborate on it. You already should know the answer to that now. So anyway, just reminding you again for the last time, and then when you get your grades, if you submit an assignment that has to do with some other than these four, you're going to lose points. You're going to get a 0, because I'm not going to, and then you're going to have a problem trying to catch up from there. So anyway, that is all I wanted to bring to your attention there, reminding you of that. Okay. So anyway, back to assignments. So you got the discussion post, you got your course project, and that's it for that particular week. Always make sure you do your reading, though. Be sure, it's very, very important. So with that being said, for the next few minutes or so, yes. The answer is yes. A work release program, if I read that correctly, let me look at the chat, but I think does a work release center count as jail or prison? Okay, I'm going to ask you. It depends. And you'll here's the deal. Generally, people from prison don't get work release. Generally, work release is something that helps a person who's in jail and they have a short sentence, less than a year, or they're awaiting trial, and those kind of situations. Usually in prison, work release doesn't take place. You might have some training in there, but generally work release doesn't apply in prison. Okay? So think about it in terms of how the whole thing works. In prison, do they generally allow people to go home or to go out and then come back to prison? Generally, no. The answer is no. So does that help you? Does that answer for you? Okay, great. But that's a good question. That is a good question. There are no such thing as bad questions. That is a really good question because, and I always tell students, don't hesitate to ask a question, but be aware that if I've already provided information for you on something, one of the first questions I'll ask, for example, that a student asked me about something concerning the project, I said, did you look or listen to the archive of the open house? And the student says, I haven't had a chance to. And I said, okay, I want you to do that. And, never tell a professor that, well, I've been kind of busy and I haven't had a chance to get around to it. The key thing is this, is that we take time to provide things to help you guys, but I'm one of those people that like this, and I'm not rude about it, but I am trying to teach you how to find information. This is getting to the research aspect. This is getting to the using your critical thinking and that great brain that all of you guys have. I'm not going to be a person who enables students. Never. There are some professors who do. I won't do that. I will say, go to this source, and then you will find your information, because it puts you into a good habit. and it's something that you'll appreciate further down the road. Trust me, I'm living proof of that. Okay. Anyway, so our objectives for this week are the goals of sentencing. What's it all about? We're going to deal with, of course, in our written assignment, determine indeterminate sentencing and explain mandatory sentencing, truth in sentencing, and sentencing guidelines. I have a little bit of inside stuff to share with you in just a minute here. Again, there is your assignment all over again. So let's talk about sentencing issues. Let's talk about that for now. Let me share with you a few things here. Many of you, and I've noticed this, that you lean towards deterrence, which makes a lot of sense. It is something that the system, when it was first created, dealt with deterrence, thinking that if you punish somebody, that they'll either won't do it or they'll think about it before they do it again. But actually, it doesn't work. As I said, in reality, we know that many criminals don't get caught or punished, so deterrence is not as effective. So, in other words, they'll start with a little thing and then progress to the bigger thing, and then they may get caught. But you don't become a criminal unless you're caught. Remember that. I had a person once that says, boy, he was a smart criminal. I says, that's an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense. That means that they weren't smart enough to not get caught, because you're not a criminal if you don't get caught, even if you suspect that person is a criminal. The definition of a criminal is someone who's been caught. All right? So anyway, deterrence doesn't work on people who are not caught, but that makes sense. And also, deterrence is believed that those who get caught will learn from being incarcerated. That's not true either, because the statistics have demonstrated time and time again, and in your readings you saw this, that locking somebody up doesn't deter them from committing a crime for a number of reasons. Let's say, for example, that, of course, if that person is an addict and they commit crime, well, early on you're going to discover in criminal justice that one of the reasons why people commit crimes is because of their habit, their drug habit, and they will commit crimes to support those habits, or to get the things that are necessary to support their habits. So you will, and so putting them in doesn't help them unless you address the issue itself. Same thing with education. I believe that people do things sometimes because they don't have the capacity or having no adequate education. And then so we will opt on trying to help a person to get some education, because I am a firm believer that cheaper to educate than to incarcerate, and it also benefits society more. Remember, when you incarcerate, a person is eventually going to be released. And quite honestly, when a person is incarcerated for a longer period of time, they're exposed to individuals in the system that help them to become more of a criminal. And that the idea is that some of these long-term inmates, or regulars as we call them, or repeat offenders, or those who are recidivists, they will prey upon the newbies, those who come in and not really have an understanding, but they'll try to teach them the system, and then they'll get out and then try to do it, and here we go again. So deterrence is not as effective. Also, in the death penalty, this has been shown statistically that the death penalty does not deter crime. In other words, people who commit crime don't look at and determine whether or not they're going to be eligible for the death penalty before they commit crime. The only one it actually deters is that individual, and that's not what we're trying to accomplish here. So then there's another philosophy or theory called incapacitation, the act of imprisoning or isolating offenders with a system in crime prevention. Well, I've already told you how that works. And then it says clearly it does assist for the period that that person incarcerated. But here's what I was talking about a minute ago. It says, however, research does not show that the incapacitation reduces recidivism, just what I said. So that brings us to my favorite and the one that I stand on constantly. I'm not only biased about it, but I believe in it. And with my background and you knowing what I went through, I should be one that's more into great incarceration, at longer periods of time and all of that. But in reality, I've learned that rehabilitation goes the furthest. Changing an individual's behavior attitude to reduce their risk to return. Now, there have been some comments in some of your discussion posts that said that a person can fake rehabilitation and that they'll only, here's what was said, I saw this a couple of times, that a person will pretend that they're not going to commit a crime and appear to be rehabilitated. So I had to kind of like say, huh? Well, I don't care if they're faking it or not. The point of the matter is, if they're not committing crime, then there's a reason why. If they're great actors, continue acting in that role. The point of the matter is the objective is to keep them from coming back to prison or eventually find themselves in a situation where they're killed. So incapacitation only works as long as that person is in there. But then when they get out, remember I told you, they may be worse than they were when they went in. Many philosophies of punishment are based from sentencing options. Sentences are typically imposed, of course, by the courts, and there's a debate about indeterminate and determinate sentencing. And so let's say this. Determinate sentence. What is determinate sentencing? Determinate sentencing is a range that says that if you commit a certain crime, you can get this amount of time. Now, the judge cannot go beyond the parameters of the time that's specified. For example, in Illinois, we have what we call a Class X felony. And the reason why we have a Class X felony is because in 1977, 78, when I was in law school, I participated in helping to rewrite Illinois' criminal code by coming up with truth in sentencing. And that was my senior research project. I actually met with the legislator as a member of the research team and did a lot of investigation into truthfulness in sentencing. So we came up with crimes that fit under what we call Class X, which range from 6 to 30. That meant that if that person was convicted of a crime that resulted in a sentence for Class X, they qualified, the judge could give them anywhere from 6 to 30 years, depending on, the seriousness of the offense and a lot of other mitigating factors that would take place, or aggravating factors which would make it less than that. But they couldn't go beyond 6. Now, that removed the discretion from the judge or minimized it. Now, what could happen is the prosecution could reduce the charges, which would remove it from that, and then change it. So here's the key. If the prosecution maintains the prosecution for the crime that makes one eligible for the 6 to 30, and they are convicted or plead guilty, their range, we already know that the minimum is going to be 6 years, and we know that you can't go beyond 30 years. And there are certain crimes that are specified out for that. In indeterminate sentencing, the judge has a wide latitude. I mean, it's the sky is the limit pretty much, and it gives a lot of discretion to the judge to determine what the sentence would be for an individual. So many jurisdictions have either one or the other. Some have a mixture, but not very many. Many have changed from one to the other. And in our time now, I haven't done any research lately, but just basing upon the papers that I've read down through the quarters that I've taught this course, there is a movement towards determinate sentencing as opposed to indeterminate sentencing. Some jurisdictions are still very liberal in sentencing. So, but sentencing guidelines, as it says, does limit the judge's discretion, and the judge can also be limited by mandatory minimum sentences, and that goes with what I just said a few minutes ago. So it's important to understand that the sentence option is supposed to help the individual to understand the seriousness of the nature. This last line here, it says it's important to understand the many sentencing options, because it's the role of corrections once the sentencing is given. Sentence is given in courts. It transfers to corrections to carry out whatever those things are, both in the community, which is probation and parole, and the institution, which is jail or prison settings. So that's kind of how sentencing operates. So you will understand better what happens. When you get to corrections, you actually have already had, it's already been determined. What I just went over is determined, excuse me, in the court section there. And it could be done by a plea bargain, or it could be done by a person being found guilty of whatever the charges are. So let's become familiar with some of these terms. What is general deterrence? General deterrence uses punishment to prevent others from committing crimes. Ideas that severely punish the convicted will deter. And I already told you what I thought about that in terms of how that works. It's not, general deterrence is not very good, in my opinion. But a specific deterrence. So the difference in the two is that the individual is the focus here. The offender should learn that crime doesn't pay. And so the penalty should be commensurate with making them realize, again, general or specific deterrence, to me, doesn't really work well in terms of individuals committing offenses. Incapacitation, talked about that, physically restraining the offender. So in other words, they're kept in. They're inside as opposed to outside, isolating them from society, those kinds of situations. Again, during the period that they're in there, it works. And then sometimes it doesn't even work in there, because they will get caught in gang situations or end up in situations where they're isolated or put in what they oftentimes refer to as the hole, but we generally refer to it as solitary confinement. So incapacitation is an issue. That selective incapacitation, what is that? Repeat offenders get longer terms. But here's the deal. All you're doing is they're giving them more time each time they do it. And I go back again to what I said, that if you want to learn about crime, you can really learn about it in prison, or I call it the place of earning a degree in criminology, not in the sense of educational, but in practical, in application, because you're going to learn from long-term people, and they're going to give you habits and so forth that obviously didn't work, because guess why? You know it, because they're in there. I used to always tell my clients, they would come to me with different things. Says, um, Attorney Wright, could you file this piece of paper, this motion? And I looked at it and I see it's handwritten and so forth, and I read it and I says, who told you this? He said, myself. He said, it works. So I said, do you hear what you just said? Your celly told you it works. Now, don't you think that if it worked, that they wouldn't be your celly? you know, think about it. I mean, little common sense should apply. And yep, that's it. yeah. So you're. I mean, it amazes me. They come bombarding me with these different pages, and I look at them and I says, I'm the professional here. Okay, you're paying me, so let me run this thing here. Okay, if I hire an electrician, I'm not going to tell them how to do the wiring because it won't be working very well, or it could be hazardous. So let your professional do the job. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Samantha. Do people call you Sam? Do they ever call you Sam? Yeah. So you Sam's, huh? yeah, I like that. I like that. That's cool. That's cool though. So your first name is your last name. Your last name is your first name with an S on it. So I hear you. All right. Very nice. So anyway, getting to rehabilitation, and again, they always say, "Well, that's for liberals. That's what liberals want." Actually, it's not. And the definition is to change the behavior, attitudes. Uh, Now, let me ask you a question. Generally, when you think about um, um, your child and you teaching your child a lesson about not to do something, are you doing it because you want to hurt them punitively, discourage them, or are you also doing it? And one of the big reasons you're doing it is to show them a new way, get them to reflect. Because remember, with the name penitentiary, it meant penance, and it was short for taking you to a timeout, kind of, so you can give some thoughts and regenerate your thoughts and reorganize them so that you can come out and says, oh, yeah, I can't do this way because this is going to result in the same situation. Well, rehabilitation is like that. It takes a person who could be a criminal and they become uh, citizens. For example, giving a person an opportunity to work through these work programs and work release gives that individual a chance to do something that gives them the ability to generate income. No matter it's not big amount, but the point of matter is developing a habit, and it's giving them the ability to learn how to make money. I had a lot of young men would tell me, man, I'd rather be on the corner selling drugs where I can make $100, $200 an hour instead of being at McDonald's where I can make $10 an hour. And I told them, I says, which one is more dangerous? And you already know, but they would say, well, it's worth it because their mind is so focused on the blingage and the things that come with it. But here's what rehabilitation does. It begins to show them, as I had many a client, I'd show them it can result in something worse than long-term incarceration, death, because there are drive-bys, there are shootings that take place, and you're the target. So anyway, the point of the matter is there are dangers in that situation. So what do? We seek also education. Why do I say education works? Is because I've seen it. I used to participate in a program with a judge that I had in the Daily Center. I'm sorry, in Cook County at 26th in California. And if you're in Illinois, you might know where that is. That's our criminal courthouse. And this judge, his name was R. Eugene Pinchot. He has since passed on. I met him when I was in law school. His son was a classmate of mine, and he was a distinguished trial lawyer. But he became a judge. And Judge Pincham and his probation officer, a gentleman by the name of Harold Bailey, came up with this idea that they labeled probation challenge. And probation challenge was an idea that if you came before the judge and you qualified for probation and you did not have your GED, one of the options that the judge would offer you is this. How about this? You can take the GED program, get your GED, come back before me, and the charges will be dismissed. Or you can go to jail, and not necessarily prison, but to jail, and stay locked up. Well, students took him up on that. And we shadowed and followed many of these students who were in probation challenge, and they ended up being successful. Their recidivism rates went down. They didn't repeat crimes because they were so busy focusing on their education, and education provided them an opportunity to elevate their opportunities employment-wise. And then because remember, they wouldn't have a conviction. So then the other thing is this. Many of those students, because the program allowed you to get the GED, but then we partnered with a City College of Chicago, Olive Harvey College on the far south side, where students can go and get their associates. And they would get their associate's degrees in college, in the City College. And so they started to like that. And other things led, and some went on to 4-year institutions and finished and went further. But the point of the matter is that you began to change the attitudes, and they said, hey, this is cool. This works pretty well, you know. But maybe they had never been exposed to that for whatever reasons. You know, I can tell you that knowledge and education can carry you a long ways. And then, of course, they got some of the better jobs as well. So anyway, so we changed the direction. The same thing when we give opportunities to individuals who find themselves with drug issues. We get them the treatment. Now, you can get education all day long if you have a drug problem, and it's still not going to change it because you haven't addressed the heart of the issue. And if the heart of the issue is drugs, then the education is not going to help any. Because some people say, oh, yeah, see, they had a chance to get in the program and they didn't do well. Well, okay, but what was their real problem? Why did they commit the offense that they had before that? And you find out it was drug-related. Then you want to try to help them with that as well. So anyway, the point of the matter is that rehabilitation changes the attitude, beliefs, and character of individuals and reduces recidivism. So that's why. So here's the deal. I'm 67. I would rather be around individuals who have been rehabilitated than those who have been incapacitated or were held for a long time and then released, because they're going to prey on me. But if they are educated or if they've been rehabilitated, then it's going to be less likely, and you begin to get the point. And who benefits overall? Contributing to society in terms of paying taxes because they're employed, contributing to their organizations, churches, and things like that. It changes how they operate in their life, and it's good. So it is something that I really stand on. Just desserts. This is the one that says basically you get what's coming to you. The seriousness of the offense We always, going to the old biblical sense, and you saw this in your reading, eye for an eye. If you committed a crime with your hand, they'd cut the hand off, or if you raped, they would castrate you. All those different kinds of things. But in our jurisdiction, in this United States, because of our Constitution, that would constitute a violation of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. So we don't do that. But the point of the matter is that you get what's coming to you. Well, again, I already addressed that, is that we can focus on that, but again, if these people are eventually going to get out, even if they have long terms, they're still going to end up getting out. So the point of the matter is, just deserts. It works in some instances. Now, I would say an individual who is a violent offender, in a situation where they're violent and they've shown tendencies to be violent, or in gang activities where they've committed crimes and result in innocent people, just deserts might apply. But across the board, for a person, for example, who steals a loaf of bread to survive and feed their family, and those kind of situations there is different from a person who's involved in a gang situation there. So punishment is commensurate with the seriousness of the offense, which I agree and understand. Okay? It's not contradictory either. So that's just deserts. Next we have restorative justice. The definitions kind of explain repairing the harm done. The offender makes amends, such as restitution or service in the community, community service, or something like that. The bottom line is that they attempt to, and then that does two things. Number one, it tries to make the person whole again that was the victim, but it also begins to develop a habit for that individual who committed the offense that they might not have had before, and that works positive in terms of their future there. So restorative justice. Equity goal of punishment. Offenders must pay back victims, and that goes back to almost the same thing as I just talked about. The justice system, such as fines and things like that, that go involved because it costs money for individuals to be administered in the criminal justice system. So the offender pays back for the crime that they committed, and that's what that is all about. Okay. Concurrent sentence. It basically is a sentence that, let's say, for example, okay, here's the deal. I'll explain this one to you by way of what I learned. I didn't mention this in my story, but my parents were killed, but I ended up meeting a lady also when I was 14, and she became my friend. She became very, very well known in Chicago and a television personality, but I met her before she was all of that. She was just starting a radio career, and I asked her to be my mother. And we became friends, and then she mentored me. Well, that was in '64. Well, in '71, she was doing television at a couple of local stations, and Channel 44, WSNS, and if you're not in Chicago, you won't know what I'm talking about, or Channel 26, WCIU. But she ended up being the victim of a kidnapping and shooting where she was shot in the head twice. And the guest that was with her, he died. And so anyway, she obviously survived those because she's now 81 years old. So she's doing pretty good. But my point being is what happened is that it came out in the paper that this person was sentenced to 120 years. And then it was brought to my attention that the 120 years was basically 4 terms of 30 years. which equals 120. But what it said is that these sentences would be served the same time of the day. So let's say, for example, there's 24 hours in a day. 6 hours of the day would be for one, 6 hours for another, six for another, six for another, and that's 24. So they were served on the same day. So that meant that 120 actually didn't mean that. It meant that they were actually going to end up serving 20-year 20-year sentence, which then later on they cut down by what we had called good time, and it turned out to be 10. But anyway, if a person is convicted of 2 or more crimes and the sentences begin on the same day are completed when the longest running sentence has been served. And so these were concurrent, they ran together. So anyway, the bottom line is that it's something that is being done away with pretty much. Now we have more of the other term, which is consecutive sentences. And it means what it says. It means that when a person commits the crime before, after they complete the first one. So in this instance, if it was consecutive sentences of 120 years, it meant that he would serve 20 years, 20 years, 20 years, 20 years, and 20 years, and he wouldn't qualify for release until way down the road. So it's a big difference. Even with the early release parole, he still would serve more time than if it was concurrent. So that's the difference there. Determinate, we already talked about that. So we're not going to go through that. Indeterminate, we talked about that. Sentencing guidelines. Sentence based on the severity of the crime and the criminal's background. One of the things that takes place when a person is sentenced is what we call a PSI. It's called a pre-sentence investigation. And the pre-sentence investigation is where the probation officer, the probation department, puts together the statute, puts together the sentence for the individual to determine based on their history, whether they've been connected with crime or not. So one thing I did want to say, going back to the probation challenge program, what ultimately ended up happening with that is that probation challenge, which I served on the committee for many years, had a member by the name of Senator Howard Brookins of Illinois. He took that concept to Springfield, and it became law and became a part of the criminal code. I think it still is now. I haven't looked to see, but anyway, so it is option, not just because that judge is retired and passed on, but other judges throughout the state of Illinois have that same opportunity as well. So presumptive sentence guidelines. Legislature sets the penalties, and that's what we talked about earlier. 3 strikes law. This is the habitual offender law. When I did my research back in 77, 78 in my senior year of law school at Northwestern, we came up with the 3 strikes issue. We call it the Habitual Offenders Act. And what that meant is that when there is an individual who's a repeat offender with no parole for conviction, the sentence is longer. So what happens is that we call it 3 strikes. So your sentence was much longer, and you served a greater period of time, and parole wasn't an option for you, and you gave it up. Now, unfortunately, some jurisdictions, I think California was one, took the 3 strikes and applied it to nonviolent offenses, which is not a good thing. The 3 strikes, the intention, at least in Illinois, that we made clear was that the 3 strikes rule should apply to 3 or more felonies where violence was involved. And so what ended up happening is that same guy that I told you who shot my adopted mother and the person that killed her, he actually got out after, I think, 11 years or 10 years. Well, I mean, so that law wasn't in effect. But by the time uh, 87, 86, it was 86, January of 86, um, he was arrested with a gun. Now, he had gotten out of jail for violent offense when he shot my mother, but before that, he had been incarcerated. Then he got out for that second one. So this time, the third time in '86, he was caught with a weapon, and it was a violent offense, and he ended up sentenced to 25 years straight term, and he died in prison. So the three strikes ruled against him, and he didn't qualify for parole, and so that's how that works. Truth in sentencing. That's when argument, requires offenders to serve big portions of the sentence and reduce the discrepancy between the sentence imposed and actual time served. So, in other words, there should be some balance between the offense that the person commits and the amount of time that they end up serving incarcerated. And that's what truth in sentencing meant. There was a time that when you heard life sentence, that could be as short as a year and a day. Now, don't ask me why, but that was how it applied. But I can tell you that now when you hear life, there now is what we call natural life. As a judge described to one of my clients, a young man told him, he says, you're found guilty of this offense. When you leave, because they couldn't incarcerate him, they couldn't execute him because he was a minor at the time of the offense, that he would leave jail with a tag on his toe. And you know what that meant. So the fact of the matter is that he would spend the rest of his natural life in prison unless there are some extraneous errors that come up later. So that's what that it means what it says. And that's the end of that exercise. And we're right at the time. We're 9:36, a few minutes over. I am done. Do you have any questions? Okay, very good. Well, thank you for attending. I don't know what happened to some of the people who told me they were going to be here didn't make it, but try to make it to the lectures. They're very important, and you can learn a lot of things that you will learn by listening to the archive, but when you are engaged in this situation, you learn quite a bit of information that will help make what you have to deal with in your assignments much easier. So with that, I'm going to say good night, and if you know how to reach me if you need to, and that's about it. So have a good evening. See you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.